Welcome back to Chaos Corner. It's your old buddy, the guardian of chaos, Big Daddy, and I tell it like it is. I'll say that to say this. Kick back and relax as we're here for another episodic YouTube adventure for story time on Chaos Corner on Guardian of Chaos, the YouTube channel. One man, unique, unedited, unscripted, raw dog for you, the fans. We're going to go at least a half an hour to an hour. History, facts. So when you come here, you learn more than when you leave here. So when you go out into the real world, you can hold a fucking conversation. I can't thank you guys enough for being here. Much love and respect to everyone that's checked in. Shout out to my moderators. I acknowledge the OTS Tribal Queen. And of course, my brother from another mother, Austin Nance. The beginning of the end. In the 2 decades following the establishment of the National Wrestling Alliance, the territorial map cornering off specific regions for promoters didn't change all that much. Now remember, as we start here, this is the first time I've laid my eyes on this, and we are reviewing and reading along live to tape. You get the concept, live, together for the very first time. So cut me some slack if I rumble, stumble, mumble, and bumble, because I haven't read this and reviewed it before. I do it live. It's like an unboxing, but a review. Story time, storytelling, emotional investment, ring psychology. Hello? Is anybody home? McFly? What? Bueller? Bueller? Anyone? What? What? Too soon? Too much? Too late? It's part of the show. So bear with me as we go through this together. Again, relax. We have plenty of time. We're not going anywhere. If there was a modification, it tended to be more of a reorganization stemming from a change in ownership, which happened from time to time. Some promoters dropped out of the picture because of old age and retirement, while others passed away, leaving heirs with the burden of selling out or trying to sustain business without them. Hugh Nichols, an ex-wrestling champion and NWA representative in Hollywood and San Diego, California, was one of the first major affiliates to meet a sudden demise. On December 15th, 1956, here in the Time Machine on Chaos Corner, he committed suicide at age 58 in his Southern California home, reportedly despondent about declining business. It's never that serious, folks. Stay in faith, not in fear. If he's for us, no one else can be against us. To put in that PSA at this juncture. Stay mentally, emotionally, physically, and especially spiritually fit. Tomorrow is not guaranteed for anyone, and we don't know what's going to happen in this insanity of 2024 and into 2025. You see society. You see how people are changing. Use your discernment. Stay safe. Like-minded people. Always have your head on a swivel. Little PSA here on the beginning of the end. Shout out to my brother JD off the script. The following year, on July 1st, veteran Max Clayton of Omaha died at age 61, and another big hole in wrestling was created. Both Hollywood and San Diego were quickly absorbed by Cal Eaton, who already operated a territory in Los Angeles. Clayton's promotion was annexed by his protege, Joe Dusek, a native Omahan, and it became a valuable stop for the AWA. During the 1960s, Paul Bowser of Boston, Bill Lewis of Richmond, Morris Siegel in Houston, and Carl Sarpalis of Amarillo each passed away while still in charge of their respective locales, and were succeeded by competent replacements, keeping the territorial system within balance. Territorial, you know that's what I'm saying. Eaton himself died on January 10th, 1966, at age 57, and his promotion was taken over by his wife, Aileen Eaton, and his stepson Mike LaBelle. 7 years later, on April 1st, 1973, Big Jim Crockett Sr., the beloved promoter of the Mid-Atlantic states, died of a heart attack. His wife, Elizabeth, and 4 children continued the business, and the territory was never in real danger of failing. And speaking of that, rest in peace over this last month. Just within the last 24 to 48 hours, Sid Udy, Psycho Sid Vicious, Sid Justice, who I worked a couple of shows, we worked the same events, hung out backstage and had a couple of pops together. Good man, Sid, very underrated. Rest in peace and my condolences to Psycho Sid Vicious. Also, of course, just recently, from the legendary Wild Samoan and Samoan dynasty, Afa Anawai. Peha Wameli Hini Kane, Pupule Wiki Wiki, Aloha and Mahalo. Kane. Kikua. Also, his brother, Sika Anawai. The legendary Samoan dynasty, the bloodline, the ultimate Us. The Wild Samoans, Afa and Sika. My condolences to their vast family, many of whom I've had personal connections and worked with for 30 years. Originally how I got motivated to get into this business besides my childhood dreams. So rest in peace to 2 men that were perhaps the most influential, especially Pops. So my condolences. And of course, just recently, the Taskmaster Kevin Sullivan. Also had a chance to be on some of the same events, conversations, things that I'll never forget for the rest of my life. Rest in peace, Kevin Sullivan, the Taskmaster. You were a great man. So it's been a tough month out there, and of course, personally, I've lost a couple of co-friends, co-workers from behind the walls. Rest in peace, my brothers. We put our lives on the line for each other behind the walls, and it carries out to society. A job that people in this society most are afraid to do, with society's worst. I want you to remember that. A quick moment of silence. Again, we're impromptu here. This is why you come here. Thank you. I know I'm a little cantankerous today. I get it. It'll get better as time goes on. This is what you get, man. I gotta be me. I gotta be genuine, right? You wouldn't want it any other way. The same was true following a host of retirements. Cowboy Luttrell, manager of the Tampa franchise and ruler of most of the Sunshine State since 1949, walked away from the business in 1970. His interest was sold to his right-hand man, Eddie Graham, another top-notch leader. Things were handled in much the same way in Tulsa and Buffalo. However, Pinky George in Des Moines, Orville Brown in Kansas City, and Harry Light in Detroit suffered a different fate. These men were among the earliest members of the NWA, but were supplanted by aggressive, politically strong opponents. Unable to fend off their rivals, they quietly retired, but the territories themselves remained unfazed by the changes. Interestingly, as various promotions were changing management during this time frame, a number of former grapplers stepped up to become regional administrators. As mentioned, Joe Dusick and Eddie Graham took hold of Omaha and Tampa, respectively, and both had been mentored by the men previously in charge. Leroy McGurk in Tulsa, Fritz Von Erich in Dallas, and Dory Funk Sr. in Amarillo were also students of both promotions and booking prior to owning their individual territories. The smart and indisputably tough Ray Gunkel had the privilege of working side by side with a longtime promoter, Paul Jones, another ex-wrestler. The two combined their knowledge to create top-notch product. Especially, obviously, in Atlanta. Roy Shire enjoyed a lengthy pro career before settling in as a promoter in San Francisco. His efforts, though, were in direct opposition, to the local veteran operator Joe Malkowitz. And within a short time, Shire took over all of Northern California. As of 1976, there were 27 NWA offices, including 3 in Japan. Konnichiwa, bitches, arigato from the Chaos-san. 3 in Canada, 1 in Korea, 1 in Australia, good day, and 1 in Mexico. The 6'10" giant Baba was at the helm of All Japan Pro Wrestling. Antonio Inoki was leading New Japan Pro Wrestling, and according to the NWA's official roster for the year, Junzo Sato was in charge of Japan Pro Wrestling out of Tokyo. Kim II, former WWA World Heavyweight Champion, was the boss of Kim II Pro Wrestling Foundation in Seoul, South Korea. And Salvador Luteroff Jr., say that 3 times fast, was in charge south of the U.S. border, running Arena Mexico. Up in Canada, Frank Tunney was still operating in Toronto, and Stu Hart was promoting in the western part of the country, based in Calgary, Alberta. Really? You guys knew that. In the far eastern part of Canada, Leo Burke was holding court, headquartered in New Brunswick, Montreal, notably. Did not have its own office at the time. In Australia, Ron Miller and Larry O'Day operated World Championship Wrestling. Regardless of how popular pro wrestling was on an international scale, as years went by, some established territories began to fail. Detroit, Columbus, Cleveland, and Buffalo were no longer among the top wrestling cities by the late 1970s. They were either burned out or on very thin ice. The reason for this decline was complex and caused by much more than a singular external factor. In the case of Detroit, the social climate and economy contributed to its demise. The Motor City was the hub for American auto manufacturing, and blue-collar workers had embraced the vibrancy of pro wrestling during the 1930s. At that time, Adam Weissmuller, the cousin of the famous Tarzan actor, Johnny Weissmuller. Oh! No? Johnny Weissmuller? Tarzan? Weissmuller aligned himself with partners in surrounding states, particularly veteran promoter Al Haft of Columbus. And in 1936, here on the Time Machine on Chaos Corner, he garnered national publicity by joining what journalists dubbed the Little Trust, a secondary faction to wrestling's leading promotional syndicate. The members of the Little Trust were thrust into the headlines after German heavyweight champion Dick Schickat, say that, Dick Schickat, double-crossed Dano O'Mahony on March 2nd, 1936 in New York. Talk about history. Stealing the world championship and declaring his loyalty to their group. By doing so, Schickat elevated the status of wrestling in Detroit and Columbus, while simultaneously damaging major promotions elsewhere in North America. What Schickat and his cronies couldn't have known was that his unscheduled victory over O'Mahony would have long-term detrimental effects on the sport. In essence, it is an actual moment in history that people can point to and say, that event changed the course of pro wrestling forever. The ramifications were harsh. The public's trust in the sport was severely damaged, and the resulting chaos caused by the in-ring betrayal. Greedy promoters created a slew of world title claimants, exclusive to their own regions. And what was left of pro wrestling's credibility was quickly lost. You guys get the history lesson? I hope you're taking out your notebooks and taking down notes right here, or you're at least gonna, download this, upload this, or hit that like button and go back and listen to what I'm presenting here. I do this for you. I could be doing anything else right now. I should be at the gym. Thankfully, I don't have to watch my granddaughter today, but I do have to go pick up the wife soon. Thanks for being here. Remember the commitment. During the tumultuous 30s and 40s, Al Haff displayed great resiliency in Columbus. Slow down, Chaos, slow down. There's no hurry. And the location of his city was pivotal as wrestlers crisscrossed across America. Workers venturing from points in the Northeast headed to Chicago or St. Louis. They could easily stop there for engagements, and for that reason, Haft was never without good talent. Grapplers also knew that Haft's promotion was an honest payday, whereas in some towns, promoters were hesitant to pay even-handed wages. We know that's for sure. Haft's fairness was attributed to the fact that he was a former wrestler himself and had traveled the same backcountry roads years earlier for scant sums, like I did. And that's where you get the history and the knowledge and learn this business. It's just the facts and how different it was. I get it. Times change. You got to change with the times. But that doesn't mean you forget the lessons. Because the game doesn't change. The players change. But the game never changes. Don't hate the player. Hate the game. If I could throw that out there for you. Haft's fairness was attributed to the fact that he was a former wrestler. Scant sums. We already went over that. He wanted to ensure the wrestlers he promoted were taken care of. Haft also loved the purity of wrestling and sought legitimate grapplers for his shows. John Tigerman Pesek, Ruffy Silverstein, and Dr. Bill Miller enjoyed lengthy stays in Columbus. DuckDuckGo these. Don't go Google it, everybody. Go Google it. DuckDuckGo. It's a more private search engine. Although Big Brother's watching everything, you know that. He's watching me right now. Fuck you. What I say? No offense, man. Lighten up. Kayfabe. They nada. Don't be so sensitive here on Chaos Corner. Don't bother. Change the fucking channel. DuckDuckGo, these famous names. You'll find some incredible history. And you know that this channel's big on history of the IWC, of pro wrestling, of wrestling. To balance his programs, Haft utilized the likes of Nature Boy Buddy Rogers, a top-shelf performer and box office sensation. Throughout it all, Haft was a shrewd promoter, knowledgeable about the mechanics of wrestling inside the ring and out, and was counted on by many of his peers for his wisdom. He overcame a number of hurdles in his administration of Columbus and became one of the longest enduring wrestling promoters of the 20th century. The wrestling scene in Detroit was a bit more turbulent. After Weissmuller died, Eddie Lewis and Louis Markowitz took over. Then Harry Light assumed the mantle in 1942. A product of France, Light was a smart entrepreneur and with help from Bert Ruby and Jack Britton, rebuilt Detroit into a stable market. Notably, Ruby was known, and he was known for his coaching abilities more than anything else, and taught many up-and-comers, including Killer Kowalski. And Britton managed a troupe of little people grapplers who became midgets, who became a hot ticket on the global stage during the late 1940s. Micro wrestling gets more numbers than some of the shows out there in big time wrestling. If you've ever seen the Micro All-Stars, the Micro Wrestlers, which used to be called the midgets, these guys are incredible. These gals are incredible on that circuit. I'm just saying, for entertainment. It's damn good. Just throwing it out there, man. I had my match with two minis back at Yale Bowl, the historic Yale Bowl, where Babe Ruth walked that field, where Ron Darling and Frankie Viola pitched that classic in the early 80s. Yale Field. George Bush Sr., I believe, pitched there as well. Not that anyone gives a fuck about that. I gave a speech of a lifetime during the seventh inning stretch at the Yale Field, the Yale baseball field, right across the street from the Yale Bowl. It doesn't get much historical and historic grounds than that field right there. And gave the promo of a lifetime, and then went on to grapple against two minis. Took the double bulldog, and one of them gave me the worm, and 1, 2, 3, and Chaos actually. I'm saying I got pinned by two midgets. I was 330 pounds. What do you want me to tell you? They caught me off guard, man. They jumped me. Light was an early member of the NWA and benefited the National Coalition's talent sharing. We were talking about the coach, Kowalski. And things ran smoothly for him until 1959 when ex-Chicago booker Jim Barnett set his sights on Detroit and began running opposition. Teamed with Johnny Doyle, Jim Barnett established studio wrestling in Windsor, Ontario and Cincinnati, Ohio. And with a stunning cast of big-name talent, burst into Detroit on April 11th, 1959. The reported attendance, we know how attendance is. The reported attendance for the show, headlined by Angelo Poffo and Wilbur Snyder, was 16,226 with a gate of $40,000. Now throw it into the current time machine, the calculator, the time, how they transition money. I don't fucking know. I learned it from Cornette and Brian Last about yesterday's money, today's money as compared to last year's money and 40 years ago and what it would multiply out to. I don't know, man. But you get the idea to draw over 16,000 fans in 1959 as well. And a lot of these outdoor stadiums and indoor. The numbers in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, even into the 70s of pro wrestling were unbelievable. A couple of slow eras after the advent, the explosion of television in the 50s, and then into the 60s with all the other sports. I mean, it went down a little bit. But what a boom for professional wrestling because you could watch it live all the time. I mean, that's the history of pro wrestling. That's why you're here. This is what we're talking about. Territories. History. All right. Focus. Chaos. We're 20 minutes in. Don't go anywhere, man. We're not going anywhere. The Barrett-Doyle clique quickly nabbed a huge percentage of the local market with must-see talent such as Dick the Bruiser, Hans Schmidt, Cowboy Bob Ellis, and Vern Gagne, completely eclipsing the Light's promotion. To stay afloat against that kind of competition, Light worked a deal with Vince McMahon's Capitol Wrestling in 1961. It began importing workers like Antonino Rocca and Bruno Sammartino. But it was too little too late for Light, and he retired the next year. Barnett and Doyle made bundles of money in Detroit, and their outward expansion reached impressive distances during the early 1960s, fanning out to Denver and Los Angeles in the west, and New Orleans in the south. By 1964, the duo shifted their attention to Australia and sold the Detroit territory to Edward Farhat, the Sheik, for a cool $50K. The name Edward Farhat might not be recognizable to many people, and in 1964, nobody outside the business even knew it. But Farhat was none other than the original Sheik, the epitome of ultra-violent wrestling villain. For years, the Sheik had been a major figure on the Barnett-Doyle circuit and an international attraction. When his hometown of Detroit went on the market, he wanted the city for his own and soon made it in the headquarters of his new promotion. Anyone? The Sheik's new promotion? Bueller? This never gets old. Bueller? Anyone? Big time wrestling. I just wanted to see if you guys knew it. I gave you a couple seconds. Not surprisingly, a few years before taking hold of the land down under, Barnett and Doyle also edged into Columbus against Haft, sponsoring Don Leo Jonathan as the American Wrestling Alliance World Champion. But following the end of hostilities, and after the title moved over to shooter extraordinaire Karl Gotch in the fall of 1962, Haft actually started promoting him as a title holder. It was unique turnaround and reflective of Haft's crumbling relationships with both Buddy Rogers, the reigning NWA champion, and the NWA itself. Aided by his son, Al Jr., the 80-year-old Haft continued to promote into 1967, but was hindered by a lack of box office drawing power. wrestling historian Don Luce identified Half/Show as occurring on February 25th, 1967 at the Cooper Arena just weeks after he celebrated his 50th anniversary as a promoter in Columbus. With Half bowing out, Farrat quickly absorbed Columbus into his growing circuit beginning in February and March of 1967 and acquired television outlets across Michigan and Ohio. Among them were WTVN in Columbus and WEWS in Cleveland. In the ring, the Sheik was unpredictable. But as a booker, he was all too conventional in the way he promoted himself as the center attraction. In time, staleness set in, as fans were overexposed to the Sheik's antics. This worn-out formula didn't decay overnight. In fact, Detroit and the surrounding area was hot well into the 1970s. Appearances by Bobo Brazil, whose feud with the Sheik was legendary, Ernie Ladd, Luis Martinez, Pampero Firpo, and the Fabulous Kangaroos were a key reason why big-time wrestling was consistently a wrestling regularity and a draw. And for a long time, followers of Half, who first saw his first-rate mat wrestling technicians, regularly, the Sheik was a dramatic change of pace. So you went from Half, to break it down here, going with shooters and technical mat technicians, if that makes sense, and I think it does, to the Sheik, who was an all-right, all-out chaos, unpredictable, ultra-violence. So the big change in that whole territory and the advent of big-time wrestling and what was there with Half. Die-hard fans in the region adjusted and embraced the Detroit methodology. And the Sheik perpetrated nearly every evil deed known to the squared circle. He was an innovator of ruthless aggression, and his tactics established a basic forerunner of the modern hardcore style. Over the lifespan of his Detroit promotion, the Sheik captured the United States heavyweight title a record 14 times and defeated a number of Hall of Famers, including Abdullah the Butcher, Terry Funk, and Bobo Brazil. But the promotion itself began to suffer due to Detroit's crippled economy, and attendance dwindled at downtown's Cobo Hall. A massive migration of people from the inner city to the suburbs forced Farrat into smaller venues with a toned-down crop of talent going into 1981. Alexa, play Tropical Thunderstorm sounds. Talk about that for a segue, huh? Old Connecticut School of Broadcasting Skills. That's right, TV and radio and movies too. Read the description up on the top of the channel. You'll find out who the fuck I am. But what'd I say, man? I wasn't good at one thing, but I did everything. I wasn't always the best, I wasn't always the worst. But that's how I survived and made it into this business, to the small amount of the cup of coffee that I did have, and recognition and respect and honor and tradition. Learned everything. Learned to wear all hats so you can be an asset instead of an ass. Stand by. Stand by, man. Goodbye. Weather's been kind of crazy, huh? Guys ready for the fall? Ready for Labor Day? I mean, I know summer isn't over till mid-September. I get it. The weather's been insane. Focus. Let me refocus. We're only half an hour in. Don't go anywhere. This is what you wanted. Fan Mail Friday. Around that same time, Ohio was experiencing the rapid growth of cable television. In Columbus, 25% of households were receiving cable via Warner's QUBE, the Cube, system by 1980. Now in the 80s, I'm in my, early 20s, mid-20s, into my late 20s before we hit the 90s. I'm just giving it away so you can gauge who the fuck I am and where I'm coming from. And what I've experienced in life. Because nothing makes up for experience. Nothing. Even if you didn't learn something, you learned something. While another 20% of homes in Dayton were receiving programming through Viacom Cablevision, Cleveland, too, had increasing coverage with 16%, but in contrast, only 2% of the homes in Detroit were receiving the expanded programming, as we hit a little lull here on this part of it with the numbers and the analytics. But I got to give you the actual facts. We stick to the facts here. That this was significant where pro wrestling was concerned because of the importance of WTBS on each cable system. WTBS out of Atlanta was a prime station in the building cable universe and featured a strong combination of popular old sitcoms, family programming, and the Braves' Major League Baseball action. But its most watched program was the exceptional Georgia Championship Wrestling, broadcast on Saturday nights. And viewers from Florida to Alaska were entered and entertained and were accessible by the lively matches every week. Let that marinate. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. And the Detroit Free Press TV critic, Mike Duffy, affectionately called the Channel 17 offering Redneck Wrestling. Redneck Wrestling. And explained that it was 2 hours of good old boys and Bruiser brothers going at it. The popularity of Georgia Championship Wrestling was infectious, and the wrestling fans in Ohio were enraptured by the Southern style of grappling. The chairman behind GCW was none other than Jim Barnett, who in 1973 left Australia and paid six figures for 38% of the Atlanta-based company. In January 1980, Barnett hired well-known ex-wrestler Cowboy Bill Watts as his booker, and the latter was quick to see the value in WTBS's expansive reach. This is all history. The territories. This is unfucking believable. Just to read it for the first time with you guys, it gives me goosebumps. So what did The Rock do? He had to show them. I'm doing the same thing here on Chaos Corner. I hope you're enjoying this, because I am. To gauge the popularity of GCW outside of Georgia, Watts set up a stylish angle between NWA World Heavyweight Champion Harley Race and the ever-popular Mr. Wrestling 2, a masked Johnny Walker. No, not Johnny Walker Blue, which you see as the banner for the channel here, Guardian of Chaos, the YouTube channel. I'm a Johnny Walker Blue guy, top shelf, but you know, you get it. Priorities, man. Priorities. The scene unfolded as the competitors battled to a Broadway draw at the Omni in Atlanta on April 6, 1980, and a trio of judges, former NWA champion Lou Thez, Dory Funk Jr., and the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes, split the votes to pick a winner. However, it was determined that Dory originally scored Mr. Wrestling 2 as the victor before changing his vote at the last minute. Always politics. The decision created a wave of backlash, and fans were furious within the week. With that result, GCW Commissioner Gordon Solie told fans they could send letters to the Atlanta office and voice their complaints, and the audience did, in tremendous numbers. Listen, Funk scored it the way he scored it. I remember that. Again, we're talking 1980 here. And to have Thez, Funk Jr., and Rhodes as your judges for a match between the champion Race and Mr. Wrestling 2 was unbelievable back then. Duck, go it. Don't go Google it, as I've been saying. If you guys don't know who Tim Walker is. I mean, I said Johnny Walker. What'd I say, man? What'd I say? He was Johnny Walker. Not Tim Walker. That's the photographer. Gordon Solie. Another legend, certainly the Mount Rushmore, if not the best to ever do it, along with Jim Ross. Gordon Solie, unbelievable. A guy that just, it's like you were sitting in a bar, talking to your buddy about what was happening on TV, watching wrestling. Just having a general conversation. To get better than Gordon Solie? Thousands of letters from around the country were received by Georgia wrestling fans, and they were overwhelmingly in support of Mr. Wrestling 2. But for Watts and Barnett, the letters were less important than their postmarks, which they used to determine where GCW's telecast was most popular. Talk about knowing your demographics. Thanks to the growing cable structure in Ohio, it wasn't surprising that the Buckeye State was at the heart of GCW's fan base outside of Georgia. The people of Columbus were particularly enthused by the show, and it didn't take Watts and Barnett long to consider an expansion into Ohio. Research, research, research. How do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. Expansion was like a four-letter word to the members of the National Wrestling Alliance. If someone was expanding, someone else was facing an invasion. Ohio was the most recently the property of Ed Farrat. And in the summer of 1980, big-time wrestling was still somewhat afloat. For Georgia to attempt any kind of expansion, it needed to first consult Farrat to discuss territorial rights. Despite plummeting attendance in Detroit, the Sheik wasn't keen on giving up Ohio in any way, shape, or form. He turned down a mutually beneficial deal offered to him by Georgia Championship Wrestling and expected his NWA membership rights to protect its territory. How'd that work out? Georgia was determined to move on to Columbus, deeming it an open city because of Farrat's limited promotions there, utilizing an old contract from his previous dealings in the region. Barnett solidified a deal to bring Georgia wrestlers to Columbus, brand new Ohio Center, beginning in September of 1980. The 80s were great. What a time to be alive. With sizable help from his new booker, Ole Anderson, who replaced Watts in May, GCW marched into Columbus to considerable success. Houses were strong, and the amazing thing was, Georgia was doing it all based on the strength of its WTBS cable programming, hence the importance in 2024, if I can draw a parallel, of social media and using it as your own platform to promote yourself, your product, whatever, your boys, your friends, your other talent, whatever the fuck it is that you're trying to promote. Use the tools that have been provided for you. This is how this is all going. Again, the game doesn't change. Do you see what I'm talking about? Are you thinking? Think about it. Especially for the talent and the people that are in the business that are watching, because I know that you do. It gets back to me. Just know that I know, and you know that I know, that you're watching. I know. It's okay, man. You don't have to admit it. I don't give a fuck. Where was I? We were talking about cable. We were talking about the takeover. Georgia was doing it all based on the strength of the WTBS cable program in Ohio. How funny is that? In the past, the development of a new city, especially one far from the regular circuit of a territory, needed months and months of targeting buildup and, more importantly, a local television outlet to promote awareness. But Columbus fans were already chopping and champing, whatever you want to say it, potato, patata, tomato, tomato, chomping at the bit to see Dusty Rhodes, Wildfire Tommy Rich, and Mr. Wrestling 2 live. Putting in overtime to work out the details, the always dignified Barnett obtained local TV outlets in Columbus, Dayton, Canton, Cincinnati, and Cleveland. That's how you take over a territory. Holy but Jesus. This only helped reinforce their Ohio incursion, and Georgia Championship Wrestling made arrangements for Les Thatcher to become promoter of record in Cincinnati, Dayton, and Townsend, Michigan. Veteran operator Vince Risco, the brother of former boxing champion Babe Risco, the pugilist, represented the company in Canton, and with Georgia stars, drew the largest crowds in 30 years. After the town drew a more than $20,000 gate, now remember the times, 1980 here in the time machine, a reporter for the Cleveland Plain Dealer wondered if Canton was now the pro wrestling capital of Ohio. How about that? From a distance, the NWA was watching the first coordinated expansion of one member into the backyard of another in years. Barnett, as booker for the NWA World Heavyweight Champion and longtime secretary for the organization, was considered Alliance royalty. He was highly influential, and if he was authorizing the invasion of another territory, he must have been on solid ground to do so. Farrat didn't think so. He was angry beyond belief and actually consented to appear for a non-NWA promoter in Atlanta on May 3rd, 1981 at GCW's main arena, the Omni Coliseum. The gig was for the International Wrestling League and saw him battle Thunderbolt Patterson in the main event. Wrestling for an outlaw promotion was a big no-no, and the NWA voted to suspend Farrat's membership at the 1981 annual convention in Las Vegas. On December 27, 1981, Farrat lost his TV on Channel 62 in Detroit, and big-time wrestling was gone for good. The Detroit territory, as it was known, was officially dead. Persona non grata. Wow. Cleveland was on GCW's radar, but it was considered one of the weakest wrestling cities with a population greater than 500,000. In fact, when Ole Anderson asked Vince McMahon Sr. about the city, McMahon told him Cleveland was dead, killing off during the promotional run of Johnny Powers during the 1970s. Killed off. His comment referred to Powers' time at the helm of the National Wrestling Federation, an outlaw promotion operated in conjunction with Buffalo entrepreneur Pedro Martinez. And if you remember, Antonio Inoki ended up buying that promotion, if I'm not mistaken, to try to become more relevant over here in the States. Because let's face it, Inoki, the legend, was not as prominent as another Japanese star that was over here, the Giant Baba. And that's why Inoki did that, to try to put his name and get his reputation, because Baba was a much bigger star coming over from the land of the rising sun here in America, just to give you a little more history and background of what's going on here. Wrestling for... okay, here we go. Back to the convention in Las Vegas. Farrat lost his TV channel in Detroit. Detroit territory was dead, just to give you a quick synopsis. Cleveland was on GCW's radar. But as we talked about, Ole asked Vince, and he said it was a dead town, and that the NWF and Johnny Powers ran it into the ground. The once successful NWF was launched in 1970, and a number of top attractions were booked for high-profile shows in Cleveland and Buffalo. At the NWF's height, on August 12, 1972, the group drew 14,000 people to the outdoor stadium in Cleveland for the Super Bowl of wrestling. 14,000, an independent, a so-called outlaw. You get all in, did 10,000 to create AEW. Here's the NWF drawing 14,000 as an independent back in the 70s. Put that in your pipe and smoke it again. Put it in the back, write it in a notebook, add it to your next conversation. And it was a defining moment in the promotion's history. The following year, Power sold the rights, hello, McFly, to the NWF World title, sold the rights to Antonio Inoki of New Japan Pro Wrestling, and kept Cleveland afloat during 1975 and into 75. However, Power's overexposure, combined with the same economic downturn plaguing Detroit, ended up sinking Cleveland. Attendance dropped to nearly nothing, and instead of big shows at the arena or stadium, Powers ran the gymnasium at St. Joseph High School with a crew of mid-card performers. As for Martinez, he quietly closed up his Buffalo office and bowed out of wrestling around 1974 as a very wealthy man. Buffalo fell into the open, and the WWF ran sporadic shows there during the mid-70s, but gave up on the town in 1976. 3 years later, Jim Crockett Promotions obtained a local TV spot for its Mid-Atlantic Championship program on WUTV 29 on Saturday mornings at 11 o'clock, debuting on December 1st, 1979. I know I'm throwing a lot of dates out there. That's why you should be writing this down. To the uninformed observer, the sudden expansion of a Charlotte-based promotion into Buffalo, New York, was a little out of the ordinary. But Crockett was already established in the region. Only 100 miles away in Toronto, Ontario, was his heavyweight stars that appeared at Maple Leaf Gardens on a regular basis. Since Buffalo was close enough to run semi-regular shows, it only made sense to exploit the opportunities there as well. In the late 1980, The network station WTVB Channel 4 acquired the rights to the Mid-Atlantic show in Buffalo and improved viewership. But WTVB was a sports-heavy outlet, and wrestling was roughly preempted by football, basketball, and tennis on a Saturday afternoon. A concerned wrestling fan inquired to the Buffalo Courier Express about the show in the summer of 1981. What a great year, summer of 81. Wondering if the station had plans to offer alternate viewing times because of the upcoming football schedule for college. A spokesman for WTVB replied simply, I doubt Mid-Atlantic Wrestling will be rescheduling if preempted. The promotion plodded on only to see Channel 4 cancel the program outright in November of 1981. They held 3 additional live events in Buffalo through May of 1982 before finally giving up. So the old phrase of shuffling off to Buffalo, it seems like a lot of people are shutting down and shutting out of Buffalo. Buffalo enthusiasts were exposed to Nature Boy Ric Flair, Greg Valentine, Wahoo McDaniel, and Ray Stevens, among others, during Crockett's run in the city, and the respected NWA style of wrestling was preserved. On August 9th, 1982, the WWF came to the city for the first time in more than 6 years and planted its flag. The promotion was reclaiming the entirety of upstate New York, adding Buffalo to a circuit that already included Rochester and Syracuse. In addition to its program on the WOR cable network, the WWF had begun a local show on WUTV in March, so to prepare the town for its arrival. Very smart to put it on TV, whether it be local cable, so on and so forth, weeks and months before you get into that territory. And that could work today in 2024 for an independent program. I mean, it just can. For a company, promotion, organization, that's what you do. Expose the people for it and then come right in. I mean, this is how it's done. Are you guys understanding what's being presented here? And a valuable lesson. And a refresher for me. UTV, Channel 29, programmed in Buffalo, also broadcasting across the Canadian border into Toronto. With a boom, the WWF made its debut, featuring heavyweight champion Bob Backlund and Jimmy Snuka, while former champion and future Hall of Famer, The Destroyer, born and raised in the region, wrestled on the undercard. Local promoter Frank Tunney had worked with the McMahons for years, and the TV exposure gave the WWF heightened leverage. It was a great territory, the Toronto area, Maple Leaf Gardens, and other venues. Unbelievable. Do your research, man. I can't do everything for you. In 1982, Backlund was showcased in Toronto. 5 times. 5 times Backlund. Crockett, alongside Jim Crockett workers, working together. And the bonds between the Tunney, Crockett, and McMahon offices were exceptionally robust. I mean, who knew? They're talking about today's climate. Could you imagine? Khan, Triple H, and whoever else would be the third company, TNA, Impact, all got together like Tunney, Crockett, and McMahon? Wow, robust is quite the word. Toronto fans enjoyed the diversity of performers, and Tunney was coining his own mint. The WWF's reacquisition of Buffalo was a pivotal move, demonstrative of the younger McMahon's broad understanding of the wrestling scene. His determination to expand was better defined by his next major move, and in 1982, he reached out to Mike LaBelle in Los Angeles, one of his father's most trustworthy associates, and sought a meeting. The 52-year-old LaBelle was more than willing to hear McMahon out. In recent years, his promotion had fallen on hard times and was a far cry from Southern California's glory days. In 1952, Bollywood had been witness to a historic show headlined by Lou Thesz and Baron Michael Leone, drawing the sport's then largest gate in history, or Baron Michel Leone, say whatever you want, Thesz and Leone, the largest gate in history in 1952. Again, take out your calculator. A whopping $103,000. Fred Blassie and John Tolos topped the mark on August 27, 1971 at the Memorial Coliseum with $142K paid in the till. The NAWA and later the WWA had been the cornerstone of Los Angeles wrestling between 1958 and 1968 for that decade. And the success continued under the NWA banner through the first half of the 70s. Now, how am I doing with my linguistic skills? You think I could teach reading 101? I think I could. LaBelle went into the funk after KCOP 13 canceled his TV program around 1974. And then he lost his outlet on KBSC 52 in 1980. A Spanish-speaking channel, KMEX, Channel 34, became his only reliable means to reach a widespread TV audience. And although it was better than nothing, the UHF station wasn't available to all viewers. He tried to boost attendance by importing talent from Mexico. And the mass sensation Mil Mascaras was a frequent headliner at the Olympic Auditorium. But despite some spikes in crowd size, things were flat for the most part, with wrestling smart fans not buying LaBelle's unenthusiastic efforts and new fans few and far between. If I said that right, I believe I did. Wrestling smart fans, they weren't buying what LaBelle was selling. And again, with his unenthusiastic efforts. He also faced a rent increase at the O and eventually moved over to the sports arena. With McMahon trying to arrange a meeting, there was interesting prospects for an expanding relationship between the WWF and Los Angeles. A move that could seriously benefit both promotions. The WWF's glitzy performers were guaranteed to dazzle the region that once showcased the flamboyant, gorgeous George and relished in the showmanship. Wrestling Insider might have figured a WWF takeover of Los Angeles was not far-fetched, or was far-fetched. Gorgeous George and his relished in his showmanships, if I read that correctly. Wrestling Insiders might have figured a WWF takeover of Los Angeles was far-fetched as we review the review, but looked at the modified status of Columbus, Buffalo, Cleveland, and Detroit, each an individual territory at one point, demonstrated that anything was possible. And with cable television giving fans a view of outside promotions beamed directly into their living room in a weird way, it appeared that pro wrestling was shrinking and growing all at the same time. I have amnesia and deja vu at the same time. I think I've forgotten this before. I'll say that to say this. Because I tell it like it is, don't you dare miss it.